Now, something tells me that there is some form of rules around naming variables.
I mean, I can't just come up with any name I want for my variable? I mean, are you going to be picky about this?
I think so.
All right.
I think so. So let's break it down here. So let's talk about some variable names here, and let's highlight the rules first. So first of all, number one, the rules are cannot contain spaces.
Makes sense.
So gotta have, all one word.
Okay.
Because really, if you put in a space, now Python is trying to figure out, okay, well, did you mean a space because you were going on to the next thing, or did you mean a space that's going to be part of this?
Yeah, or is it two variables, or
exactly.
Yeah, it is confusing.
Yeah.
Space is meaningful in Python.
Yeah.
There are some programming languages where having spaces in one place or another doesn't affect your code at all. Python is actually, there are situations we'll see later today where adding spaces or removing spaces can actually change the way your code runs.
Yeah.
So you do need to be cognizant of spaces in Python, and in variable names, it's just flat out not allowed.
Exactly. Yep. Can't have spaces. Number two is it is case sensitive. And if I
That's a big deal.
It is. If I was to say the number one question that I get whenever I'm teaching any language to a group of people that are learning this for the first time, the most common question, probably the first question that I always get is this case sensitive? Now, my answer to this is actually not to answer the question. That my answer to this is treat everything like it's case sensitive. Because if you treat something like it's case sensitive and it's not, you're fine.
That's true.
But if you treat something like it's not case sensitive and it is, you wind up running into problems. And, one of the questions that kind of come through on the chat window have been things like, databases and so forth. So obviously we can start working with other external systems. Well, one of the things that you find from time to time is that you might be programming in a language, let's say like PowerShell. And PowerShell is not case sensitive, but PowerShell is going to be accessing other things, maybe like SharePoint. And SharePoint is case sensitive all over the place. So if I'm treating PowerShell like it's not case sensitive, now all of a sudden I'm going to run into a problem because I typed something in that's going to be passed into SharePoint where it is case sensitive, and now all of a sudden something breaks. So treat everything like it's case sensitive because it's going to help you avoid those kind of what I like to call mixed case scenarios where it's case sensitive here and not case sensitive here. And really just in the long run, it's going to make your life just that much easier.
So this is just one of those best practices we were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
So every now and then, you just want to make sure that, said as a best practice, just assume that an uppercase N and a lowercase n does not mean the same thing.
Exactly.
And you're talking about it here in variables, but it's also important to be aware that that's true of commands as well. There was actually a comment earlier inside the questions that said, hey, I typed input with an uppercase I, and it didn't recognize the command. It gave me an error. Well, those commands are case sensitive as well. And I also just want to quickly mention with the Q&A, something's going on with the Q&A display right now, so I can't see the questions you're posting at the moment. So if we're not answering, we're not ignoring you. We just aren't seeing the questions. So we'll try and get that sorted during the next break. But so the commands are case sensitive as well as the variables.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. The other last rule is it cannot start with a number.
And that's one that people don't expect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is something that's kind of common. But if you're brand new, yeah, exactly. You're like, why can't I call this, 3 names? And I would be storing 3 names inside of there and just use the number 3. It's just it is one of those things where the programming language, if it sees a number, it's expecting number. Now that's not to say that you couldn't do name and then the number 3. That would be fine.
Yep.
But you can't start with a name.
Yeah, that's just one of the rules.
Exactly. Now let's keep on keeping on here with our variables, and let's talk about some guidelines here. So this is a big one for me. Should be descriptive.
Oh, the number of times I have seen code where the variable name is A or X. And I'm like, well, the thing is, when you start writing code that has 26 different variables, you start going, what was an X again? Where did I store that? Did I store that in X or A?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if there's, there's a
Spit it out, Christopher. Spit it out. You can do this.
I'm going to get there. So There's a book out there, refactoring code, and it's kind of written for Java, but it's put together by Martin Fowler and a couple of other people, and it has this great concept in there called smells.
Okay.
That code can sometimes have smells, which it's sort of like, you go to the fridge, you open up the carton of milk, you give it a whiff, and it smells a little off. Now, just because it smells off, does that necessarily mean that the milk is bad? No. It means that it might be bad, but you're not going to know until you taste it. And I always love this concept that I'll go ahead and, I'll take a swig. Oh, that's awful. And then I immediately, hand it to somebody else. Here, try this. And, it's not so much, I almost kind of understand the concept of, getting somebody else to test that. The part that I can never understand is the person who's now accepting this. You were just given information. This milk is bad. Here, try this. And of course, what do? Okay.
Duly noted, Christopher. The next time you hand me a glass of milk, I'm not drinking it.
Exactly. There you go.
But you're right. But you're right. Sometimes you look at code, and when there's a sense to it. You look at the code, and instinctively the reaction is, I can read this, I can follow it, it's clean and easy to understand, or, okay, this may work, but I'm having real trouble understanding it.
Exactly, yeah, and it's not necessarily that it's bad, it just doesn't look quite right. There might be something off there. And so there's that little concept called a smell. And one of the smells is, and I know this is going to contradict us a little bit here, is having comments in your code. Now, that's not to say don't put in comments. Comments are wonderful. But if you have a comment and it's having to explain a line of code, you really should stop and take another look at the line of code that you've written and make sure that the line of code is as readable as possible. And sometimes there's nothing you can do. Sometimes it's just, some little library, or that unfortunately the way that something is built is just a little clunky, and that's just the way it is, and that's fine. But there are times where what you're doing is you're using that comment instead of just writing code that's easy to understand. So if you have a comment saying X is used to store the user's age, that's a problem. That instead of using X, you should be using user age.
Yeah, it's very good to have descriptive names. It makes a difference. And I strongly recommend, if you're storing a date, or if you're storing a date in particular is a great one. Don't just call it date. First of all, that might be a reserved word that you're not allowed to use in certain programming languages. Call it birth date. Call it expiry date. Be specific about what it is. But you don't need variable names that are 82 characters long, because that's going to take you a long time to type, and we're all lazy coders. But even though I'm a lazy coder, I do use meaningful names for my variables.
Exactly. The other thing is about casing. So let's kind of take a step back here. And remember, again, case sensitive. So you do want to choose a scheme, if you will, which is basically just make this decision and just always do this over and over again. And so I've given you the two common ones, which is Pascal casing and camel casing, which are written exactly the way that they're set up. So Pascal casing starts with a capital letter, and then every word thereafter, no underscores or anything like that. It's just simply appended right in. And then there's camel casing, which starts with a lowercase letter.
Which is, if you look at the slide there where it says the word favorite sign and your favorite sign, the horoscope, those are actually examples of camel casing.
Yeah. And in Python, camel casing generally is the way to go. Guess what day it is? Sorry. There's a handful of people that will have gotten that reference.
I didn't get that reference at all, Christopher, just for the record.
That was a US-centric reference.
If there was someone else out there who didn't get it, I'm right there with you. All right, moving on.
That was a US-centric one. I apologize.
Just keep going.
I'm just going to keep going. All right. So back over here, then let's go ahead and take a look at some of the different variables that are there, and let's go ahead and highlight the ones that are good. Well, starting up at the very top, we've got variable 1.
So variable 1, that should be valid.
It's valid.
It's got a number inside the name, which is okay.
But it's at the end.
But it is kind of a weird name for a variable. It's not very descriptive.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I look at that, I don't know what's inside of it. So I'm going to highlight that one in red. That one's not really good.
Now, first name, there's a definite problem with the first name because I've got a space in the variable name, and Python's going to get confused by that.
All right, so we can't use that one.
Date, that's one Python would probably work if I use that as a variable name, but the problem with that is it's not descriptive. It said, what date are you storing in there? We often work with a lot of different dates: start date, end date, birth date. Be specific.
Okay.
3 name, that one's, Python won't even let me do that. It's going to give me an error because I'm using a number at the beginning of the variable name.
Okay.
DOB, B. That's an interesting one. It's a valid name. I said Python's not going to give me an error because I've done that. But at the same time, it's a little confusing. I think it might depend who I was writing the code for. Like, you know what? 3-letter acronyms exist everywhere.
They do. TLAs, 3-letter acronym.
Yeah. And if it's an acronym, but everybody in that organization knows and uses every day, then it's okay to use an acronym for your variable name. But,
exactly.
So if I'm working at a hospital and I'm storing date of birth and everybody refers to it as DOB, then I think that's fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if it's not a commonly used acronym, I would stay away from it.
Okay, so we'll put that one in yellow. How about date of birth?
I'm good with that. I like that. Date of birth, it doesn't have any spaces in the name, no numbers at the beginning, and it's descriptive. I think that one's good.
Okay, and then how about your favorite sign in the horoscope?
Again, descriptive, doesn't contain any spaces, doesn't have a number, but I'm lazy, so I would just find that really long to type. So that would be the only reason I would avoid that one.
And going back to something that you mentioned before, you know, context is key. Context is king. So if I'm writing a sign where a program where I need to know somebody's favorite sign, I know what we're going to be talking about there. So if I was doing something that involved horoscopes, I'm going to know that's what I'm writing. So if I say sign, I know that I'm not talking about a street sign.
Yeah.
I know that I'm not talking about a neon sign. I know that I'm already talking about horoscope. So I could handle this without writing out in the horoscope in that type of an application. So context is key. And again, kind of going back to DOB, is that are abbreviations bad? Abbreviations are a smell. That it can be bad, but not necessarily. Context is king. So if this is something that you would absolutely need to know in order to work in your industry, in order to do your job, then it's perfectly acceptable to use it. If everybody knows exactly what that is, perfect. If it's something where you're having to define it, again, that's a smell, might not necessarily want to go in and do that.
Yeah.
Okay.